So you think the best Christian equivalent would be do best by others and do good by yourself last? Well, there is a verse that says to seek the interest of others before our own. Now, that certainly it doesn't mean that we treat ourselves poorly, of course. We never want to violate our own dignity. That much is certain. But perhaps one of the most dignifiable things that we can do is in our plenty or in our being okay with ourselves. Yes, certainly. Don't be self centered. Don't be egotistical. Don't be arrogant. Don't think only of oneself. Um, there are other people, there are other factors that are important as well. Hey, King Doctor, welcome in. Yeah, the family's well. I mean, there's two of the kiddos are sick and they've been kind of throwing up lately. But other than that, I mean, we're okay. But I was reading, and I don't remember where I saw it. It was in a note in the Baltimore Catechism number 3, the Father Cornell's Confraternity edition. And I remember him making a statement. And I mean, I could kind of thumb through this and, I might run into it while I'm talking. Perhaps I could find it while I'm considering stuff. And he uses the term intolerance. Now, what's interesting is that in general, when we think of loving others, we think of willing their good for their own objective good, right? So there's an objective good for people, and love is to will the good of other for the sake of the other. In other words, we're not willing their good for our sake. We're not doing it because we're going to use them as a means to an end. Do something for them because we're going to get something out of it, but something that's genuinely good for the other individual. Now, basically what that would mean then is that there are certain things that we certainly would want to be we would want to be intolerant of. Because there's a lot of things that are quite bad for us. Quite bad indeed. And the Catechism, it goes over all these different types of sins, particularly the 7 deadly sins. We've heard about those, The pride, which is the queen of vices. Everything else seems to flow from that. But you have lust and gluttony and all this stuff, and yeah, of course, we're going to want to be intolerant of substandard living. I don't know if I'm going to be able to find the quotation that I had in mind. It might be a bit too distracting for me to try to do 2 things at one time. I'm sure that I highlighted it, and I thought I would be able to find it again quickly. I liked the quotation anyways. But I think in general, there's a lot of things, particularly in our culture, that from a Catholic perspective is contradictory to our understanding of what it means to love others, what it means for something to be good for others, and See, I don't want to give up on like looking for the passage, but I think I'm going to have to. But yeah, so there's pride, covetousness, lust, anger, often referred to as like wrath, gluttony, envy, sloth. There was a movie that kind of highlighted some of these. I think it was called Seven. It had Brad Pitt in it. They're referred to capital sins. But some helps to keep from committing sin by praying, by receiving the sacraments, by remembering that God is always with us, by recalling that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, by keeping occupied with work and play, by promptly resisting the sources of sin within us, and by avoiding the near occasions of sin. These are, yes, yeah, absolutely. The Morgan Freeman. To plant trees, huh? For shade. Yeah. You know, shade is really nice on a hot day. That's awesome. Oh, is there? Oh, interesting. Yeah, so here's just a little bit information about like so we don't we want to strive to practice the opposite virtues. Okay, so if we're struggling with lust, you know, we want to strive to work on chastity, for example. So here's just a brief description of some of these things. Pride is the inordinate seeking of one's own excellence. It is opposed to the virtue of humility. Covetousness is the inordinate seeking of temporal goods. Covetousness is twofold. First, the inordinate seeking of temporal goods by acquiring or possessing them unjustly. This form of covetousness is opposed to the virtue of justice and is often a mortal sin. Second, the inordinate seeking of temporal goods by loving or desiring them too much. This form of covetousness is opposed to liberality and is ordinary a venial sin. Lust is the inordinate seeking of the pleasures of the flesh. It is opposed to the virtue of chastity. Anger is the inordinate seeking of revenge, or an unreasonable opposition to a person or thing. It is opposed to the virtue of meekness. Gluttony is the inordinate desire for food and drink. It is opposed to the virtue of temperance. Envy is sadness at another's good fortune because it is considered to be detracting from one's own excellence. It is opposed to the virtue of charity. Sloth is the distaste for spiritual things because their attainment requires much labor. It is opposed to the virtue of charity. So these are the chief reasons why a person sins. Now, can we truly be tolerant of such things? No. There's sin of thought, there's sin of desire, sin of action, sin of omission, and all of them flow from human weakness that's brought on by original sin. You haven't done sloth. So yeah, so these things aren't good for us. We don't. God didn't give us a will so that we would misuse it. Notice that the term inordinate is used quite often when it talks about these different things. There is a way in which we can inordinately do things. We can have inordinate passions, for example. We can have misguided passions and ungodly tempers and the such. And so what that means then that there is an ordinary way that we live that is truly freeing, because when we pursue the virtues of temperance and chastity and long-suffering, courage, and so on and so forth, when we pursue these things, they actually free us, even if they're difficult to practice and it requires discipline of the will. We will find ourselves being freed from vice, and it's vice that truly ensnares us because it wounds the conscience, it damages our relationship with God, it drags us down to be more like the animals. It weakens the will. It really subdues and presses down our rational faculties, and over time can be habituated, become addictions, and so on and so forth. So, yes, we should be intolerant of all vice. That makes perfect sense. Why? Because, there are really depraved things out there. And the last thing we want to do is be dragged through the mud. Take the image and likeness of God and drag it through the mud. No, I don't say these things as one who has perfected all virtues. That's not the point. I say it because me, of all people, need to be reminded that we can't give evil an inch. Because what happens when you give an inch? Just look at our culture. If you give an inch to the progressives, for instance, what do you end up getting? You get the slippery slope, right? You get more and more of that thing, and worse. We demand, for the sake of virtue, we demand standards and values in our culture. And of course we would. And why wouldn't we? Because we want to raise our children, and not just our children, but we would like to see other people's children grow up in a culture that incentivizes virtue, where there's structure, where there's discipline, where there's values and standards that we can, under which we can flourish. That's the thing. See, someone might say, well, I want to throw off all restraint. I want to throw off all virtue, all truth. And really, true freedom is that untethered arbitrariness of just doing whatever that I want to do. If I have an ideation, I'm going to entertain it. If I have an inclination, I'm going to explore it. And that this is true freedom. And really, it's not. It's not. The will, the undisciplined will, is evidence of an intellect that does not yet see as it ought to see. See, the will is a rational appetite. So, why do we do one thing over another? It's because we perceive some good in it. As I've mentioned before, the intellect finds its fulfillment in the beatific vision, beholding God, who is goodness and truth and beauty itself. So when we see goodness, when we see beauty, or it's our perception of these things, our will, we are drawn to these things and we do these things. So when we see an unbridled will, it's because there's a lot of false perceptions of what is objectively good in the mind of the individual. Even if you were to ask some people why they're even addicted to certain things, beyond chemical dependence and things like that, they would tell you that they're trying to meet a need of some sort, even though they're doing so inappropriately. This was always common sense. Yeah, I would like to think so. So many kids these days who are so mindless, careless. It probably doesn't help if an individual is staring at TikTok, for 3 hours a day. See, that's not something that's tolerated in my house. My children don't have smartphones. They don't have what's the word, unprotected exposure to the internet and be able to just do whatever they want. I don't tolerate that because it's basically a portal to hell in your pocket. Just think about it. Like back in our day, like even before dial up, or when dial up was just starting up and most people didn't have access to the internet, you know, if you wanted to be exposed to pornography or nudity or something, you have you had cable. You might have had like 3 a.m. movies on Cinemax. You know, maybe a friend had a magazine because he swiped it from his father that had it hidden somewhere or whatnot. The exposure was occasional. It was very circumstantial. It wasn't something that you could pull out of your pocket and have like infinite video access at all times. That's anonymous, affordable, and accessible. A true portal to hell right there in your pocket. It was just different. I honestly don't know. So, parents who, in their ignorance, are giving their kids phones and they're just doing whatever they want with them. No. So, really, be intolerant. Don't accept things in our culture just because like almost every kid in that class, in my kids' class, almost all of them have smartphones. I can't even begin to grasp that. I'm not tolerant of that. Just because something's in the culture, it doesn't matter. It could be something in some other culture. It makes no difference. If it's bad for us, it's bad for us. Just because some people can't recognize how bad that is. So you went for a walk in the industrial estate. Okay. I walked past a closed factory with sets outside. It was like park benches. There were 2 teen boys sitting across from each other. It took 5 minutes for me, okay, it keeps moving, I don't know why, to walk the distance to their area, but not once did they look from their phones. Right, yeah, they're just, yeah, people are addicted to their phones. We should be intolerant of that. I don't have a smartphone. I have what is called a Gab phone. I don't have gaming apps on it. I can't access the internet with it. No social media. That's great. It's great. Well, like everybody at work is like just doing this all shift. I'm just like, looking around, finding stuff to do. The way life used to be before our brains were hijacked by a little glowing rectangle. Yeah, people have an addiction to their phones. Are you going to tolerate that in your life? Are you going to allow your mind to be hijacked? Now remember, you may think you're the one who's choosing to what you're going to expose yourself to. But when you're sitting there scrolling, guess what? There's analytics, there's algorithms exposing you to what they want you to be exposed to. Right? Your brains are being hijacked. It's not good. People who spend 3 hours on TikTok, that's not good. There's so much stupid, shallow, idiotic things that are on there. Doctor said, when I was a kid, it was, as you said, circumstantial, but in this day and age, it's so scary. It's actually scary what you can do and find so quickly. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Anything. And some of the worst stuff, the things you wouldn't even think about. And what's worse is that we have a natural curiosity as people, so it's like a rabbit hole, and then an hour later, you come to your senses and realize, what did I just spend so much time doing? How did I get all the way down here? Yeah, you're being led like a carrot on a string. He looked up 3 seconds later. The other one did. No talk, no interaction, just phone. Yep, just phone. Okay. Yeah, I don't know what those things are either. Social catfish or a gadfly? No, I have no idea. I'm genuinely considering, as a 26-year-old, going back to a flip. Yeah, look up Gab phone. It looks just like a, and it may be rather affordable too. It was cheaper. It was actually cheaper for me. I think I only pay like $25, $25 a month or something. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's best not to have those things in your pocket. Oh, both your parents have a Nokia, huh? Yeah, so I mean, so for me as a Catholic, there's the moral issues, right? We were looking at the seven deadly sins. We were looking at things from a moral perspective. Hey, thanks for the follow. Welcome in. Do I even have my notifications on? I don't know. Yeah, man. They say that they're on, so I did not get notified. A good thing I looked up. Yeah, so as a Catholic, from a moral perspective, I assess the culture. I see those things in the culture which are contradictory to my morality. And then I have to just be intolerant of those things. I mean, they're not good for me. They're not good for other people. I see these things. I see people influenced by these things in our culture, like the phones and everything else. And I think, like with the phones, yeah, I mean, maybe some people might be able to get some good uses out of some things, but you also have to be incredibly careful with this stuff. Um, One of the recommendations for avoiding sin was to avoid the near occasions of sin. So not just avoid sin, but avoid the near occasion of sin. I mean, that gives us pause, you know. Hey, Baller, welcome in. So, social catfish, you get free via your work. You can enter a phone number, eh? You can find... oh yeah, grab your IP. Yeah, yeah. That's another aspect of things. You know, working on or really doing much on the computer. They grab all that stuff, all that data. They sell it, and then they customize ads, and yeah, stuff can be effective. But yeah, so there's the moral difficulties in our culture, which I see, and so we shouldn't make any room in our lives for vice. Okay, so we recognize that there's vice. We're working on holiness. We're working on stuff, but it's not like we'll wake up in the morning and be like, you know what, we're gonna develop a new vice today. You know, I would like my will to be more enslaved than it already is. And of course, that's ludicrous. That's crazy talk. So be intolerant. Right? So, what does it mean to tolerate something? To tolerate it, like, um, if like we're to say that we're willing to associate with it to some degree, or we're willing to compromise with it to some measure or another. What does it really mean to like tolerate something? And I think um, one way in which I might be able to frame this is there are some things that I tolerate, not bad ideas. All right, I made this distinction before. Bad ideas should be critiqued. Ideas should be treated like ideas, and people should be treated like people. Yes, some people really internalize their ideas, and you you can't find some clever way of critiquing the ideas without them thinking that you're critiquing them. It's kind of weird. But some people are really intellectually honest, and they recognize that other people are at different places in their own intellectual journeys, and there's different intellectual traditions and so on and so forth. Some are bad. Some are not good for us. I would say that's pretty much anything that's contradictory to Catholic thought. Um, but I think what's important is that I recognize that there's bad ideas, and I recognize there's people who subscribe to bad ideas. But the person who's subscribing to bad ideas, we have to remember they might not think those same things 10 years from now. They might think something different. And hopefully it's better ideas were presented in the marketplace of ideas. Somebody saw a bad idea, and then they came along the person and they dialogued, right? A free exchange of ideas, developing mutual understanding so they can better fine tune the conversation to get to the best ideas. Right? Because there are some ideas that are so good they just rise to the top. If one is really intellectually honest, like who's really going to want to sit there and justify vice? Who's going to want to sit there and use the word pride to describe their activities? Would we rather be humble? Oh, sub high. Savage, thank you for gifting a sub to Baller. Baller, enjoy those channel emotes and the sub badge for 30 days. Yeah, so it's good to have good people. So let's say we have people in our life who aren't encouragers. Let's say they're bad influences. And by bad influences, well, all right, I think I can use this example. So I don't get drunk. I'll have a couple beers, but I haven't given myself to that. Gosh, when was it? Yeah, when was it? It was almost 10 years ago. I drank a whole bunch of beer, I smoked a whole bunch of cigarettes, and I splurged on a bunch of porn this one night. And it just totally just cracked out my... This was 10 years ago. It really cracked out my brain. I'm like, this is so bad for me. I was so edgy and angry the next day and everything else. I'm like, this is so bad. All of it was bad. And I'm like, no, I can't allow myself to do this. I remember I was rolling on the floor and I'm like, oh, the room's spinning, I was like, that's horrible. This doesn't feel good. And so I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do that ever again. I'm not going to drink too much. I get tempted. We all do. We all have our vices that we're wrestling with. But there at least it starts with the level of recognition. It starts with the level of recognition. There's something we're doing, something we've done for years, and we recognize, yes, I would like to, stop doing this. I would like to make a moral adjustment in my life, and it's like that. The walk of shame for them. Oh, the morning after. Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know what? I've shared this story before. I had a conversation with a gamer friend, and it was the last conversation we had because after the conversation, um, this gentleman wasn't willing to talk to me anymore. And I remember we were talking about morality and conscience and guilt, shame, and things like that. And apparently, he had come to a point in his life where if he enjoyed doing something, like I think I could share the story because I'm not giving the name of the individual. But this person said that they spent the evening with another gentleman who was quite effeminate, spent time together, and said that he had fun. And what he said that over time, even though he felt guilt and shame at some point in his behaviors, in his sexual behaviors, um, that he felt that any guilt or shame that he felt was only the result of like social constructs and values imposed upon him by his parents or something like that. And so therefore what he had to do was just keep engaging in the act until he no longer felt any guilt or shame. Just keep engaging in the act. And as I was hearing this story, I'm like, there's a Bible passage that talks about what you're explaining. It's called searing your conscience. And St. Paul, I believe it was, uses the imagery of taking a red hot iron and just searing the conscience with it so that you just become numb, morally speaking. Right. And so it was a kind of a rough conversation. I think it lasted about an hour, but I remember hearing that story, and I'm like, you're literally explaining exactly what the Bible says is one of the worst things you can do to numb your conscience, to sear it, as with a red hot iron. Now, the most loving thing that one can do is not let your friends, like friends don't let friends drive drunk, but friends also don't let friends get wrapped up into progressive ideologies. And unfortunately, by the time people are acquaintances or they associate with or have associated with each other for quite a while, learning that you're on completely different um, what's the word? Totally different places when it comes to certain areas of thought, which is one of the reasons why I actually recommend it to a lot of gamers to kind of keep the gaming hobby milieu kind of free from politics and philosophy and culture and religion and all of those sorts of things, because we get along when we talk about the video games. If you want to introduce something that is not common among the gamers, like we already had a commonality. That commonality was that we enjoyed playing video games. If you introduce elements that aren't common to everybody in there, you're going to cause problems. Now, if you want to create like a sub gaming culture where it's about gaming and it's about gender ideology too, and strange sex fetishes and other things, I wouldn't want to be part of that. That's kind of creepy. I'd be like, guys, you're like sacrificing a goat to the devil, and be like, I came here to play some video games. Uh, I left something out in the car. I'll be right back. You know, you just gonna slip away and just drive off and never come back. I mean, in a sense, that's what ends up happening. But unfortunately, it's not a mere subculture. It's kind of become like the main predominant edifice, establishment kind of thing. And so, it's an interesting quotation that I had learned recently. It was just I'm trying to remember what study it was and how many children were involved, but it had to do with children who were identifying as some alternative gender or something like that. And it was said that, what was it, like 46% of them actually also met the diagnosis for autism. And not only do I think that's interesting, I think people who are drawn into speed running, particularly those who can really obsess about it and play it compulsively, can generally be, autistic. I think it's a good outlet for someone's autism. And so I think what that meant is that some of these gamers are really autistic. A lot of people who are autistic can also be wrapped up into other mental illnesses and be convinced of other persuasions. But the thing is that a lot of these people are actually reaching out to the internet for a sense of community where they feel 100% accepted with their weird sex stuff and what they like to do with their genitals and stuff. I don't understand why that's people like to be have that part of their gaming, like, hey, welcome to my channel, we're playing this game. Hey, guess what I like to do with my genitals? Like, hey, stop it. Keep that tag away from me. I don't care. Like, put that down. Okay, put that down. There are children here. See that's how I generally approached it, and I thought to myself, okay, well, if there's a predominant amount of crybabies who just demand that every space just be saturated with rainbows, and that people can't just talk about video games. And of course, someone's gonna be like, yeah, but Chambers, listen to you. You've been doing everything but gaming on your stream for the last few years. Oh, that's fine. What's wrong with that? I could do what I want on my stream. I'm not a part of a gaming team or anything. In fact, the only reason that retro craze doesn't exist today as an option for people is because I created it. As long as it existed, I had to be on it. But since I was no longer doing the gaming only, and guess why? One of the main reasons why I don't do the gaming only anymore is because like so many other people who use the Twitch platform, I want to bring more of myself to my own stream. Do my own thing. And guess what? I'm not going to be a part of anybody else's team because they probably have very specific criteria, and I respect that. So I'm not going to be part of that. We're depending on all right, so those sorts of things end up causing. Now here's another thing. I don't have to participate in subcultures that are saturated with things that are contradictory to my own convictions. And that's one thing that some people didn't understand. Or they understand and they don't care. What a lot didn't understand, or at least seemed to didn't care, was the fact that, I kind of feel like I'm Padme here. And Anakin is turning to the dark side. And I'm like, you're just going down a path I cannot follow. You're breaking my heart. It's like I can't go along with this. You've changed, you've done something to the gaming environment, and it's no longer conducive or a safe place. So I made the argument, if you just make it neutral, if you just make it about gaming and we're only talking about the games, and you have people from all kinds of different backgrounds that aren't fighting because we're talking about the games, it makes it where the commonality is gaming, and it would make it would make perfect sense, wouldn't it? It would make it very much. It would make it much easier for us. You think that I should dress more like Padme? You mean like the Queen of Naboo kind of Padme, or the Padme who was on Tatooine, right? Because I kind of like the Tatooine Padme more. I always thought she was adorable. As a teenager, I had a poster of Padme. In the bottom right hand corner, I had her dressed up as the Queen of Naboo, and then I had the poster of Padme, and I'm like, man, she's cute. So yeah, as soon as the gaming environment, or when some people started saying, well, you don't deserve to be or Natalie Portman. Yeah. I always thought Portman was attractive. We're all attracted to different things. So, like, for me, I couldn't tolerate. See, that they wanted to create a gaming culture, subculture, whatever you want to call it, a conglomeration of people coming together, not just around gaming. You must also accept a certain set of progressive standards, for instance. Right? So it's not enough for you just to participate in the games. They want you to shut your mouth, sit down, and just be talked to, just be exposed to these things. And people will just do whatever they want, say whatever they want, and you're just like, what? I can't speak to that. That's not what I want to be a part of. So, did I belong in speedrunning? Yeah, anybody could speedrun. But these people just, they're not interested in just the games. And I think they know that. They know that they're not just in it for the games. They want to connect in all these other ways. In my mind, yeah, you can connect with people however you want, but at the same time, it just gets what? Well, I think it depends, because I think there are certain games, particularly retro NES game speedrunning. There are some people who are just like, basically, as soon as people came to know that I was a Roman Catholic, and I couldn't participate in, I couldn't facilitate using my gaming team as a platform for things that are incongruent with and even contrary to my moral convictions and my view of humanity and so on and so forth. Um, yeah, people were very, very unkind to me, despite the fact that I just had moral lines around me. And as soon as, people want to cross those, and I say, hey, can you take a step back? You've crossed this. Okay, this is a non-gaming line right here. Don't cross that. Don't enter into my gaming only team with something that's non-gaming, and then just think that it's going to be okay and then attack me for it. Be like, it's your problem. Find a different team. Whatever. I mean, many years later, I'm still talking about it because it still just baffles me. But these are the sorts of things that we shouldn't tolerate. I removed all of my gaming times. I still have some world records that aren't on speedrun.com. I just removed everything. I just do my own thing. I'm not interested in being asked over and over and over again. Do you tolerate this? Do you tolerate that? You have to accept this, and it's even worse than that. Catholics, conservatives, people who aren't interested in gender cults and things like that. A lot of times we just want to be left alone. But you know what I've learned, and I can say that I've learned something from the more radical activists. The militant activists, the ones that go around and demand from absolutely everybody that they promote your stuff, to promote your ideas and stuff like that. I'm like, no, not good. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that stuff happens. But basically, you know, personnel is policy. Those who are in charge get to set the expectations and that. Yeah. It made no sense to me either, which is why it took me so long to think through it. But I'm thankful. Okay, I'm thankful. Some people might think that I talk about this a lot because, like, I can't forgive people or something like that, or I'm obsessed. Or no, it actually was a turning point for me to make greater convictions, commitments, get greater commitments to my own Catholic faith. Because here I was being persecuted for being a Catholic and saying I can't have these kind of things associated with me. I can't participate in that. I can't allow my team to be a platform for other things. And I was nice about it. I talked to the person and talked to other people, but that doesn't matter. They're all a bunch of victims, a bunch of entitled victims who think that everybody else has to just bow the knee to them. And I wasn't going to do that. I was not going to do that. I tried reasoning with people. Do you know what it's like trying to reason with a hate mob? It reminds me of the episode of Family Guy when Brian is standing on the front porch and he's trying to reason with the crowd and they're just complete idiots. That mob mentality, all the virtue signaling and all this other stuff is like, no, I'm not going to tolerate that stuff. I'm going to speak my piece and then go about my business. I made several videos saying adios. I can't be involved in this. I mean, it's basically me telling people that you have taken the gaming environment and you've so saturated with things that I can't be involved with. And And they're like, well, that's your problem. You're just a bigot. You're this phobe. You're that phobe. And it's like, how about you people are just depraved, and you're sinning, and you're going on in greater sin. I think that's fair. You're depraved. I can't tolerate that. I'm not going to tolerate their depravity. So I'm not going to associate with it. You know. Could you elaborate? One especially can't be tolerated. What ones you can't tolerate? It's not like an individual. So I'm a Roman Catholic. Some years ago, I created a retro gaming team because I'm a partner to here on Twitch, and I created a team called Retro Craze, and its main focus was on live retro gaming performances. And the expectation was, what I envisioned for the team going forward, was that we would, because we were in a team environment, because we were associating with each other with this brand per se, that we would focus on the live gaming performances. So no reruns, so it's live. Also that we would use gaming tags only. That would be particularly more relevant now in this kind of tag structure. So, and also like the elements underneath and all of this other stuff, and just try to keep it focused on the games, gaming commentary. I know we interact with chat and have conversations at time, and so there was some flexibility in that, just try not to get too carried away. The idea was to, because retro games are already attractive, and because we were already coming together on this particular shared passion, the idea was that we could stream to the broadest audience possible. All right, so we weren't appealing to conservatives also. We weren't appealing to the progressives, Sure, there were probably some Trump supporters on the team. There were probably some people who voted for Hillary. I mean, that probably was true. But we weren't going to bring that into the gaming environment. We weren't going to draw focus to it. We weren't going to get into debates and things like that within the Discord. In fact, I decided that we weren't ever going to participate in any kind of charities or anything, because it's technically non-gaming stuff, and then people will fight about what charities to give to. And I, very early on, I said, no, we're not going to participate in charities. Not everybody will agree on which ones, and so it can cause problems. And so there were a few people at the time. There was the LGBT tag at the time. And of course, when you see the LGBT tag, the first thing you think of, they like to do strange things with their genitals. Like, I don't need to know what creepy fetishes they have. I don't need to know any of that stuff. So I don't really need the tag telling me that, they may have some kind of non-Catholic anthropology and how they understand gender and other things. It's like, I don't need to see that, because none of it's compatible with the teachings of the Catholic Church. None of it's compatible with my convictions. So I don't want to be exposed to it. So I'm not going to tolerate it. I'm just not going to do that. Would you consider it different from someone partaking in divorce and discussing it openly? Would I consider it different from someone partaking in divorce? Well, I mean, I wouldn't be able to support a Catholic who has... now, if somebody was in a state of divorce, then they most certainly, can continue to participate in the Eucharist. Now, obviously, if they were the aggressor or the one who abandoned the other spouse or whatnot, certainly confession and some spiritual direction would be appropriate, sacramentally required, depending on the condition. Now, if you're talking about somebody whom they abandoned their spouse, or they were abandoned for one reason or another, and they entered into a second marriage or some sort of civilly recognized marriage outside of the sacrament of the Catholic Church, and then they just continue in this adulterous relationship, and they continue to go up to the Eucharist, and they just openly talk about it all the time, about how they do this, they would require a stern talking to. That scandal. Not only is it portraying a view of marriage that is contrary to the sacrament, it's something that's done publicly, so it's scandalous to other people. It's certainly not discerning the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist. It's certainly not taking confession seriously either. So, yeah, Zuckerberg, I mean, there would be problems with that. I certainly think that like a conversation would have to ensue. And I'm not saying it's an easy situation. I mean, there's a very tangled web there. But they've placed themselves into that position. Sometimes out of ignorance, people have done such things. But that's why I insist on coming onto my stream and teaching firmly that our consciences should be formed by Catholic moral teaching, that our intellect should be informed by Catholic teaching, so that if people who are Catholic are interested in becoming Catholic, that their faith can be enriched, they can actually know what it is that they believe, and they can be faithful to it, and they can avoid some of these moral pitfalls and misunderstandings. So yeah, a few years ago I decided, and I'm very thankful. All right, so there's a story in the Old Testament where Joseph gets sold as a slave into Egypt, and his brothers meant this for his harm. He was highly persecuted by his brothers. He was thrown into a well, and then when some slave traders came by, they sold their brother, and then they lied to their father, saying that he was eaten by wolves. So the father thought he was dead, and all the while, so that he, nobody would look for him, but he was a slave in Egypt. A very unfortunate circumstance. But Joseph was highly favored, and so he was risen to like the second or third position in Egypt over time. And during a famine, his brothers came seeking food. And he did not at first reveal himself to them, but when he finally did, they freaked out. But then he basically said, "I forgive you." But he said, "Listen, what you did, you meant for evil. You meant it for my harm. But God permitted it because God meant it for my good." So some really good things came out of what I experienced at the hands of these depraved individuals. What I learned most of all was that, you know what? I can't be neutral. So I was attacked on Twitter. I said, well, I can't be neutral, but basically the way they framed it, and I wouldn't frame it this way, but I can still learn from it. And he basically said that, if you do nothing, then you're basically taking the side of the oppressor, for instance. And while I don't frame this in that kind of Marxist kind of way, But what I would say is, it is there is something true about bad things happen because good men are cowards, right? Uh, and so basically, what that did is that, you know what? I'm not going to sit on the fence. I'm not going to hide in the shadows. I'm not going to be ashamed of the gospel. And so I'm going to say very blatantly exactly what I think. And I'm not going to be afraid of a hate crowd. I'm not going to be uh, afraid of being ostracized because, hey, if depraved people want to ostracize me, good riddance. I, I'm not going to. I'm not going to tolerate that kind of childishness. That's just ridiculous. But I did learn something through some of the conversations I had. And I said, you know what? I need to be more bold about my own convictions. I need to be able to enter into any arena and proclaim exactly what I believe to be true. Because there's enough crap out there that is luring us into just absolute decadence. I'm interested in human flourishing. I'm interested in becoming a better Catholic, living a better life of virtue, and becoming a saint, and so on and so forth. I don't have time for decadence. I don't. No, so no, I'm not going to tolerate that anymore. So I learned something. Another aspect that I learned in it is that it gave me an opportunity to think through all these new weird progressive strategies and tactics in their militant activism, which I never had to really consider, but also consider those things within the context of my own philosophical thinking at the time. And so I wrote a really lengthy thing thinking about how to talk to these people where they're at using more postmodern thought and language. And I actually realized through that process that I was using bad ideas, the bad philosophy, all my arguments, all the points that I was getting to certainly were true, but some of the postmodern philosophical thoughts I came to recognize were actually incompatible with my Catholic faith. Going through that process actually made me more Catholic. So not only have I made greater commitments to my faith, I made commitments to teach the gospel, to proclaim the teachings of the church, be a faithful child of the church, and have that be part of my life. So do you think it's possible for any organization to be apolitical, whether it's gaming community or whatever? I can say, at least in terms of myself, for 5 years, I didn't really talk about my faith or anything like that. Every now and then there may have been like an off conversation that took place in chat while I was speedrunning and everything, but it was more in passing. We didn't spend a lot of time on it, but so it was just to focus on Castlevania 3 world record attempts. That Alucard route was very super fun. Now, a good example would be, there's a lot of companies out there who basically just make a product. Do I think a beer company, for instance, this is current events, it's relevant. Bud Light took a huge hit. They took a huge hit. Some people started boycotting because they got involved in social issues. The CEO wrote a letter saying, "We didn't like. I'm not critiquing the letter. I'm not saying that I celebrate the letter. I believe the letter. I'm just stating that the CEO said we didn't intend to get involved in some sort of cultural controversy or anything like that." I think they could have not done that, with the Dylan stuff and just made beer, and I think people would have been fine with that. They certainly wouldn't have lost a lot. Hey, Dragon, welcome in. I wanted to go back to what you were talking about earlier with divorce. I'm a Free Will Baptist, but I can't really get answers because it is complex. I get it. So essentially, essentially was unfaithful to my wife. Okay, sorry to hear that. I tried to reconcile, and she did not want to. That's unfortunate. I think we should always fight for the marriage. It was my fault, and I completely admit, and I'm not ashamed of it. However, I am questioning my eternity because I am now married to another woman. I have asked for forgiveness, and I'm very active in your church. Of course, I ask about those topics to my pastor, and some say because I am genuine and sin can be forgiven. Still a question that's going. All right, so while I do try to be very pastoral in my language, there is a sense in which so you're in a different theological tradition, right? Right. I think what he means by he's not carrying around the guilt of it anymore. He's forgiven himself of it. Or it may be a typo, but yeah, that's a good clarification. Okay, so I'm gonna. I believe in being sensitive, so I will say that your particular position isn't necessarily under the jurisdiction of the sacrament of marriage or canon law or something like that. So because you're not a Catholic, but there can be cases, for instance. All right, so there are 3 cases. I'll explain these briefly. Okay, so in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic, if let's say that you became Catholic and that this was the case. All right, let's say you became Catholic, this was the case. What would have to happen? Well, there's 3 things. One is to pursue the annulment process. All right, so what is an annulment? An annulment isn't where the church looks at a valid marriage and said it is no longer valid. All right, believe me, the church can't do that. That's why King Henry VIII caused a schism in his own country and declared himself head of the church in England so that his bishops would grant him an annulment. So the Catholic Church can't do that. But the question is well, what is the annulment process? It's to explore whether or not it was a valid marriage. Now, there could be certain factors involved that may mitigate the legitimacy of the marriage. Infidelity later on in the relationship doesn't invalidate the marriage if it was valid. But there's that question of, was there validity beforehand? So, like I said, there could be some mitigating factors. Some of those might be things like, and I don't want to press this particular point too far, and that is not really understanding the vow, not really understanding the lifelong commitment and really grasping it. This was a point I think that was made by either Pope Francis. It may have been Pope Francis, because something like that kind of changes the dynamic of how it progressed. You know, like how many people really truly grasp the lifelong commitment that's being made, like really grasp it. Okay, so like I said, I don't want to press that point too far. Sometimes people get married because they were having a kid and the father of the daughter said, no, you're going to get married, and was very coercive about it. And so under these cases, one might say that you weren't free from coercion and entering into that relationship. So there's actually, I think, a list of ways in which a list of impediments that could be cause for the invalidity of a said marriage. Okay, that's one. The second has to do what is called the Pauline privilege. All right, so the Pauline privilege is, let's say you were both unbaptized at the time, and then after the marriage you became baptized, and she was no longer willing to live with you, so she abandons you. Paul says that you would not be bound to this, so that you could actually then find a baptized wife at that point, because of that particular situation. And the reason why it goes back to impediment, has to do with that kind of thing. That relationship can become sacramental because of the baptism of both. But if one becomes baptized and the other doesn't, and the unbaptized abandons you for whatever reason, then there's what is called the Pauline privilege. There's also called the Petrine privilege. In canon law, for instance, and this most certainly does not address, this would not be the case for you, and that is if two people actually said I do, they made their commitment, and the marriage was merely ratified according to canon law, but was not yet consummated. You didn't go back onto your honeymoon, consummate that marriage in an open act of procreation, the conjugal act that was open to life. And the husband or the wife decides that they don't want to consummate the marriage, they don't want to continue forward with it, the Pope could actually dispense with them. So those are those three things. All right, so I'm going through a Bible study in Luke. Okay, so I've looked at some of this stuff, and so I'll tell you exactly what I think. The one verse that came up was Luke 16:18. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another woman commits adultery, and the man who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Seems pretty straightforward, and I feel like I am... Is that failing or falling? Looks like maybe failing. I am just fearful for our eternal salvation. It is hard to understand because so many different sects of Christianity interpret the Bible differently. Okay, so if you take everything that Christ said on this matter, and also Paul, it seems very clear that remarriage isn't a thing. Now, the only part that ends up being interpreted differently is what is called the Matthean exception. So in Matthew, there is what is called the exception clauses. So twice in Matthew, Jesus makes this comment to the effect of what you're saying. Anyone who divorces his wife and marries another, except for porneia, or it's variously, this Greek is variously translated, such as like marital unfaithfulness, or but I think that this isn't an exception that Jesus was giving, because what he was talking about in the law, what is porneia here, it would have been like an incestuous relationship. So in the Torah, one can be too close in relation, and that could violate Torah. So there were unlawful coupling or unlawful marriages, and Jesus was just affirming that, okay, if you had entered into one of those, yes, this would be an exception. It's not lawful. You can part from them. You should part from them. Your relations are too close. And so this wouldn't constitute what I'm talking about. We see this again in the Council of Jerusalem in the book of the Acts of the Apostles, where James gives this statement about staying away from the meat of strangled animals, from blood, and from porneia, right? And this too is the point. Because of the Jewish Christians would have continued to hold that there were unlawful marriages due to too close relations, that it would be scandalous to the Jewish Christians for the Greeks to pursue those types of relationships, despite the fact that it's against the Torah, and this is something that Christ himself had gave an exception to, because he recognized the Torah's application when it comes to marriage. He's talking about this stuff in the context of marriage as well. So some Christian theological traditions interpret the exception clause not in that way. They'll interpret it as, if your spouse cheats on you, then you can leave your spouse and you can marry somebody else. Some will try to do that, but that's so inconsistent with every single thing else that Jesus says elsewhere, where there are no exception clause, and Paul's very clear about it. So, okay, listen, this is the tough part about it. So people have lived their life, right? People have lived their lives. People have done things. People have entered into relationships. People have done all kinds of things. The kind of recommendation that I generally would give to people is, if you were to take Catholic theology and apply it to your life, and none of these things apply. It's not an incestuous relationship, okay? It's not like it's closer than a third cousin or whatever it is. And the Petrine and the Pauline privileges don't apply. There were no impediments, so you entered into a valid marriage. You were both baptized. Worst case scenario, and I know you don't want to hear this. Worst case scenario, and there might be some other factors I'm overlooking in this, because number one, we do want to live a holy life, and that does require us to know exactly what a holy life is. And many of us, when we apply morality to the things that we do and think and omit and so on and so forth, we don't measure up. So it's not just you. I've had plenty of things in my life. Now, this kind of situation requires a lot of attention, even from a Catholic perspective, because there are a lot of people who were Catholic, and then they kind of drifted away from the church, and they ended up getting remarried, and what ended up happening is they would come back, and then they would realize that I can't partake of the Eucharist unless I stop having relations with this individual. And so they basically had to live a life of celibacy and not engage in acts with this other person because it's adulterous. And then they could go up and partake of the Eucharist as long as they maintain that kind of brother-sister relationship with their best friend. There isn't any anything strict in Catholic theology about cohabitation. In this sense, it might be different. Sin weaves us into all kinds of sticky situations, and so I'm good with thinking about morality and things like that, and it doesn't always come out as the most compassionate and merciful kind of way. I do think that you are right in being concerned about it. I think that you should continue to pray about it and be informed on these sorts of things. It's a really tough thing to go through. So I'm definitely not watering that down or sugarcoating that at all. It's a tough situation. See if I missed something here. If you were a free will Baptist, don't you believe that the relationship you have with God is the primary aspect of your faith? It's really tough. So generally, I think that a Baptist, many Protestants, would hold to Scripture, and I've presented a pretty good biblical case that there are no real exceptions beyond incestuous close relations, which is Jesus just reflecting the Torah. But even with that said, and I know this can be an issue between Protestants and Catholics, that some people are like me and Jesus and my dear blind kind of thing. I don't need people. I don't need church. I don't need any of these things. But that's a real hard sell, because historically, Christ established his church. And so it's in and through the church that we participate in the new covenant. It's a new covenant community, a family. And so there isn't just this relationship with God and there's just this, it's just me and God kind of thing, and it's completely divorced from everything else. The Catholic faith is very incarnational. It's very sacramental. The church and Scripture, the apostolic succession, apostolic tradition, the papacy, all these things are part of our faith, because essentially the me and God kind of thing, what does that even mean? Because one can just project any morality that they want upon God and justify anything that one wants to do. But if Christ actually established a church, endowed it with the Holy Spirit coming upon the church, the birthday of the church at Pentecost, that the Holy Spirit serves as the soul of the church, in that the church is the pillar and foundation of the truth. It's the last line of defense for all morality. It is the divine institution through which the mysteries of Christ and everything was to be revealed to the world through the church. Any of these conceptions of divorcing the church from God or our relationship within a context of what God has purposed, it's people say, well, it's just me and Jesus. But listen, if Jesus has purposed the church for us, then how does that even work? It's like, well, I just believe in Jesus. I just believe in Jesus. Yeah, but have you read what Jesus actually taught? Are you not going to believe what he taught? He talks about his church. I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it. Right? I will build my church upon this rock, upon you, Peter. I give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Everything you loose on earth have been loosed in heaven. Very rabbinical language, the binding and loosing, very rabbinical language that the church actually has heavenly authority when it comes to binding the consciences of others. Other than viewing that through some other theological tradition, I find those verses to be very convincing. So how would you describe your faith? The Catholic Church has a concept of the relationship between man and woman different than many sects. This is true, Destroyer. I've heard some say the covenant is between man and God and don't accept marriage as a covenant at all. Yeah, there's different theological traditions. I'm way behind. Let me get caught up here. I think I remember you saying that about being a Methodist before, Dragon. Because of the separation and acceptance of other thoughts, I left. That's interesting. I certainly would be interested at some point, like, what was it about Methodism that you didn't like? I was a Methodist before, so, but when I say that, I don't mean I was joined to any denomination that was uniquely following the teachings of John Wesley. I was with the Church of the Nazarene, but I studied Wesley a lot. I was more faithful to my understanding of his writings than I was to the 16 Articles of Faith, which is why I gave up my credentials. I do believe relationship with God is important. Yes, absolutely. I also believe we need to understand the Bible. I agree. And follow what it teaches. I also agree. I guess a lot of pastors I have talked with talk around the issue and are afraid to tell me what they think I want to hear. Yeah, you don't want that. So hopefully I was bold enough for you, presenting some stuff. People have all these different interpretations of the Bible. Yes. I think with all this going on, we need to know exactly what is said, what we think they are trying to say. In my group, the pastor said, getting a divorce from my now wife to reconcile with my ex-wife is like making another sin to make it right. Plus, I have children with my wife now. Not trying to derail, just I'd like to hear different thoughts on the issue. I think we have gotten to the point we rationalize all sin because we can just say God will forgive me and his grace will cover me. Yeah, I will say one thing for you at this particular moment, Dragon, is that the fact that you're really wrestling with this issue, the fact that you're asking intelligent questions and that you feel deeply about the issue, it demonstrates that you're very good-natured, you're very genuine in wanting to follow God's will in your life. And so I just want to commend you for being in that place. You could be indifferent. You could be seeking justifications for things, you know. It's a really, really, really tough issue. It really is. It's not an easy one for you. So certainly be like what Destroyer said, be a good father to your children. That should not even be a factor here, of course. You should definitely do that. Being repentant of your past certainly is true for all of us. So you're definitely not alone there. While it is certainly true that having a holy fear of God is certainly important, I can definitely see that in you. It's coming through very strongly in what you're saying. And but at the same time, also take into consideration God's very gracious. God understands your situation, and He's also patient with you. So don't think that there isn't time for you to hash these things out. I think God is patient with the process. The intellectual journey takes time. The kind of intellectual commitments I have today aren't the ones I had 10 years ago, or some were different 20 years ago. And God was patient with me through all of that. So, I mean, is the solution to just cease engaging in sexual relations with your present wife and just love her and raise your son and stuff like that? Some people do that anyways. Sometimes the wife may develop a condition where she really can't risk pregnancy or something like that, and the spouses may actually refrain from doing things for various reasons and not just medical. There's the verse where it says, don't prolong the not coming together, lest you be tempted and burn with lust and all of that stuff. But at the same time, if your present relationship is a civil marriage and it's not a valid sacramental marriage, then nobody. It wouldn't apply in that case because you're not really expected to engage in that act. But here's the tough situation. Even if you came to that conviction, even if you came to the conviction that you should, sacrifice your sexuality for the sake of the kingdom, become a eunuch for the sake of the kingdom, for instance, to use that language that Jesus uses, that those who can't accept this should. There's this issue of whether or not your present spouse would be open to that, So I think it's something that would require time and prayer and reflection, and God is patient with you during that process. So, but at the same time, there's also the principle of making sure that if you're not fully convinced of something, sometimes exercising caution during that process is prudent. I'm not saying exactly what that would look like in your case, but that's probably the best thing I can say at the present moment. In the Catholic Church, marriage is a sacrament. It's considered indissoluble. It can never be separated. So if you were validly married to this other person, technically that is your spouse forever until they die. If they die, and I'm not saying that you should speed that along, God forbid, then you would be free to enter into a marriage. So that's another issue that's involved in this as well, because let's say you refrain for 30 years or whatnot, and then your first spouse ends up passing away. You could enter into a new sacramental marriage with your legal spouse and begin engaging the act again. So that's one way of looking at it, So those are things that you can think about. And like I said, there are impediments that could have made it so that the first marriage was never valid to begin with. These sorts of things, from a Catholic perspective, would require canon lawyers. It would require a lot of pastoral care and things like that. But don't think that there isn't a moral solution. And don't think that you have to have all the answers right here, right now. Definitely don't think that God is not a forgiving God and that He's not patient with you at all in all of this. He certainly understands your condition and all of the moral factors involved. And so being patient with yourself as well as you hash through these things is going to be vitally important. So I hope that helps you. There was a method to the madness. You can't contribute this one. United Methodist Church is separating. Half wants to accept the LGBTQ as pastors and serving positions. And okay, yeah, I did hear something about that. I did hear something about that. Give me a moment. I had a thought on that. Okay, my apologies. I do need to take more sip breaks because my last beer got warm. Okay, so yes, I heard about the United Methodist Church basically breaking in half. I've reasoned on this stream before, and yes, this is a shameless plug. One of the things that attracted me to the Roman Catholic Church, and I understand that I'm probably way behind in chat, so bear with me. One of the things that attracted me to the Roman Catholic Church was its certainty on moral issues, from sexual ethics to bioethics. I was highly impressed with the church's position on bioethics, against contraception, against in vitro fertilization and surrogacy. Why is this word escaping me? Surrogacy, sorry. Abortion, and so on and so forth. The church has very specific moral theology on all of this stuff. In the church, doesn't budge. It doesn't matter what country does what with its laws. It doesn't matter what ideas are very prevalent in the culture, whatever the zeitgeist is, the spirit of age. It doesn't matter. The Catholic Church isn't going to compromise. So looking at what happened with the United Methodist Church, it's like, yeah, it's the Catholic Church has the attributes, the charisms of infallibility, indefectibility, and authority. So it can't deflect. It can't do what you saw with United Methodism. And so that's one of the things we can recognize. We can recognize the moral certitude and the uncompromising position. Don't let people like Father James Martin, and the German bishops confuse the issue. The church is indefectible, even if a small a handful of bishops or a priest here and there basically go AWOL and become rogue and start, teaching anti-Catholic stuff. People have been doing that for 2,000 years, and the church still stands today. So that kind of stuff is irrelevant. Now, who knows? Maybe the German bishops will cause a schism. I mean, they certainly seem to have a schismatic attitude right now. So it was very unfortunate for me to hear that. Like with women priests, for example, that can't happen. Theologically, the Catholic Church has no authority to ordain women. It can't happen. The Pope said, I can't. The Church can't. It just absolutely can't happen. And people don't really understand that theology will take offense because they're trying to apply their ideas to the church or bring ideas from outside the church into the church. And that kind of stuff would cause schism. This is the same thing with the United Methodist Church. So it's not about the people who might identify as LGBTQI and whatever. It's the ideas that they hold that are contradictory to what the church teaches that is problematic. It's in violation of Catholic sexual ethics. It's in violation of what the church teaches in terms of anthropology concerning the nature of the human person. And so the Catholic Church, while it's sensitive to in its ministry to help people on their spiritual journey, to meet them where they're at and so on and so forth, won't compromise its own self in that process of helping other people live holy lives and to come into conformity with what the church teaches concerning morality. And so those incompatibilities are going to cause problems. Okay. A pastoral attitude or a response to people isn't the idea that the only way to love people is to love their heresies. But rather, we love people simply because they're people, and if they have bad ideas, then that's where we instruct the ignorant. That's where we confront the sinner, and so on and so forth. This is what is happening with children. I don't want my children to pay for my sins. It's like drinking a bottle of alcohol and then asking for forgiveness. I might have asked for forgiveness, but I'm still dealing with the consequences. Hey Anna, welcome in. Thanks for the follow. For some reason my notifications aren't working. The consequences. The consequences are those temporal punishments. All right. Temporal punishments for our sins that have already been forgiven. And often, due to the seriousness of our sins and our situation, it does call sometimes for radical adjustments in our life. And these things, these consequences, these residual effects of sin, these temporal punishments, they remain in our lives for the reproving of the soul and is meant as a tool of sanctification to shape us to become saints. So take that stuff into consideration. And so with all of those things, just recognize that the things we've done in the past, we're going to be disciplined for those things, but it's for our betterment. It's painful at the time, very painful. But I think it's important that we recognize that when we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And now that we're actually taking Christ seriously, don't think that he has died for you any less than he already has. Do you think the different religions were done to confuse people? Well, I mean, I do recognize that we are a moral and religious people. And so this flowers out in different cultures and different ways and so on and so forth. So, I mean, we see a lot of different world religions. We certainly do see the Ishmael Isaac thing with the Israelites and the and with Islam. That's Muhammad, I think, lived in the 6th century. So it's, what is going on over here? Those cats are like doing things. So at least what's really nice, well, one of the common elements, I should say, between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism is that we all claim that the God that we worship is the God of Abraham. And I like that there's a starting point there. There's a commonality where we can start some common ground, where we can have some dialogue. I think that's certainly important. But given the fact that we certainly are very religious, humans are very religious by nature, that there would be different conceptions of God. So in the Greeks we see and also with the Romans we see the pantheon. So like gods are like these superhuman-like beings, right? So they're just different conceptions of God, very deficient and not really worthy of our intellectual assent. But we also have other conceptions like pantheism and pantheism and Eastern mysticism, which are usually more pantheistic, or some that are like kind of more nihilistic and so on and so forth. As if like ultimate reality is impersonal, but we still refer it to as some sort of divinity or something that's bigger or greater than ourselves. There are certain truths that can be found in these different world religions. So from a Catholic perspective, there's the Catholic Church, which has the fullness of truth, and then we see bits and pieces of Catholic thought in different religions throughout the world. And God can certainly use those elements, the light and grace, that God can use in these different religions. But ultimately, to draw us into that fullness is certainly something that's important. God is certainly putting eternity in our hearts, and has certainly gave us a sense that there is something that's greater than ourselves, some objective meaning that exists, and reality that imposes itself upon our consciousness, and that we experience and live within the context of nature, and it's natural for us to want to know nature's God. So certainly that. Savage said, I went to a Church of Ireland service on Christmas Eve. Oh, that's awesome. And the priest went full acceptance on the... Oh, did he? Not much subtlety, to which I expressed my disgruntlement in real time with derisive noises. Yeah, unfortunately, you can have bad priests. Now, in this case, you're talking about the Church of Ireland, so... but like even within the Catholic Church, you can have bad priests. Your sister would say, shut up under her breath. It did not. That's a disheartener. That's funny. It did dishearten you. The priest even went pro-Ukraine. it's an interesting thing to bring out. So, ideally, within the context of the liturgy, the priest is going to expound upon the reading of the day. How that gets applied to our lives, right? So there's the Old Testament, New Testament, gospel readings, and so on and so forth. And how do we communicate that in a way that's relevant to our day and age, common people's problems? How do we speak to the people in the pews, and so on and so forth? Getting involved in some of those issues can certainly be they're more problematic. There was one Catholic priest who actually during the BLM riots, he actually spoke against like looting and vandalism and harming people and those sorts of things. And he started talking about some of those things in the context of his sermon. I have a copy of that on my YouTube channel. Got a lot of views. A lot of people actually were enjoyed the sermon. He got in trouble by the bishop, but nonetheless, he was trying to contextualize. I mean, yeah, breaking the law is not a very good thing to do if you want to be a good citizen. It doesn't make much sense. People could be heard in other ways, if there was something there to be heard. So, looking forward to working my way towards Catholicism. Well, I'm here to answer any questions you might have. Yeah. The thing is the morality. Like, if you're looking for really strong, detailed morality, you're going to be affirmed in reading books on Catholic morality. And, I mean, there are some really good books. Speaking of which, I have a book coming in the mail written by Jason Everett. I do plan on reading this on stream. It's subtitled The Catholic Guide the Catholic Understanding, or Catholic Guide to Understanding Gender. That's what it is. So he's read over 20,000 pages and doing a deep dive. Jason Everett, for the last 20 or more years, has been focused on teaching teens about Catholic sexual ethics. And he does an absolutely extraordinary job. He's faithful to the church. And he wrote this book called Male, Female, Other. And I plan on going through that on stream, looking at it from a Catholic perspective and just doing a deep dive. So I've already read Ryan Anderson's book, When Harry Became Sally, and Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. They're both very good. So I'm really looking forward to Jason Everett's book that will be written from a Catholic perspective with teens in mind. So we're going to give that a full read on stream. Very excited about that. We don't have a lot of books like this, and this one I think is going to be a gem. 24-hour streaming coming. No, just grabbing a beer, which I need to drink faster if I want it cold. So I had a feeling the answer was not going to be an easy one. We never know when the end is near, and I'm just concerned for my salvation. Yeah. So hopefully the way that I kind of frame this for you is, stay, nothing can pluck you from the hand of Christ, right? To those whom the Father has given to the Son. And so I think it's important that you just keep yourself thrown down upon the foot of the cross. Just stay there, okay? Just stay there. Jesus knows all your difficulties, all the complications, all the problems, all the sins. Whatever you do, just grab on to that cross, just hold on to it, and God will help you through the whole process. God will help you. All right, we come to God broken, we come to God confused, we come to God tangled in all kinds of strings. Just hold on to that cross and know that you can approach the Father with confidence, okay, because you have an advocate with the Father. All right, you have an advocate. All right, so remain friends with God, and over time, God will help you become more holy, will help unfold and develop some of these situations in your life. I believe that. I realize you're consuming a Bush product, but that's another stream. Well, the thing is I don't know if it's itemized, right? If it's itemized to, I wanted Heineken. I like Heineken, but I recognized that yeah, I know that's an issue. I'm not getting the Bud Light though, so hopefully that's good. Hey King, welcome in. Good eye. Good eye. Good eye. Hey Anna. Oh yeah, I do have a Discord. So it's more of a private Discord. It's not something that I publicize. But over time, once people have dialogued and chat, I get to know you, you get to know me, and I find that you would be a good fit to invite to the Discord. And believe me, you're not missing out on much. It's not very active. I mainly just say, hey, I went live, and I might post a thing or two. Then I'll send an invite if somebody's interesting. Not somebody's interesting, if somebody's interested. But yes, it's also good that you're interesting too, because then you add value to discussions that might take place there. So absolutely welcome in first time chat. Master Debtor from New Zealand would like to debate you on a topic. What topic do you think you disagree with me on? Well, we'll start there, because maybe we don't disagree. So where I live, the churches have rainbow flags at their entrances. I have seen pictures of churches that had those things. Now, once again, we all come from different backgrounds. I recognize that some people have been influenced by the culture more than others. I like to tell people that everybody's welcome to come to the Catholic Church. Everybody's welcome to sit in the pews and begin their spiritual journey and start learning about Catholic teaching and moral theology and so on and so forth. That there's a place for everybody to go through that process. And so if I can help, if I can stand along anybody who wants to come to God and to Christ and His church, I'm definitely here to assist in that way. I can understand contemporary issues being used in an allegorical sense in a sermon. This guy went full, this is how it is, and if you think differently, you're scum. Oh, okay, like yeah, the subtleties. Heineken was tasty 10 years ago. It changed though. Really? It tasted differently 10 years ago? I had no idea. Yeah, I mean, you're definitely welcome here, Anna. Everybody's welcome here to talk and hang out and everything. I used to have a Discord that was public, and I had a whole bunch of people there, and like over time, I decided to be a little bit more selective because I don't know who people are, and I don't really know what their motives are, and yeah, I think you get it, like you said. But yeah, if over time that you're interested, but I'm still interested in what is this topic that you want to debate me on, huh? What topic do you think we disagree on? I don't see you in the list anymore, so maybe you took off, and we won't get an answer to that question. Well, it takes me a while to get to chat, so gotta be patient. A big part of my problem was drinking. Oh yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth with drinking. So I was looking at what was going on around us one night. Something in me snapped. Sorry. It's probably really loud. I stopped drinking and smoking after being heavy in it for 25 years. At the same time, I went on a water fast. Made it for 9 days. Wow, 9 days on just water? That's pretty impressive. I don't think I'd be able to make it a day or two. It made you go hard with the church and see what is with my salvation. Oh, okay. Well, I mean, prayer and fasting, they certainly go. They certainly go together. All right, so it is 10:30 here. Do you ever do debates with non-Catholic Christians on anything really? Most people in chat are non-Catholic, and I talk to them all the time. Really, 27? Oh no, I really like my Panda Express. I don't know how I would fare with a long fast. I'm having a hard time with the fast that I'm required to do. Have I done any formal debates? No, I haven't done any formal debates. I like the discussions that do take place on this channel, though. Like I said, most people who come in here are non-Catholic. Most people are, and so I have we've been reading through this book here. Haven't been able to get to it in the last couple of days because there's chat activity. Sometimes I'll go 2 hours where I'm just talking into a webcam and nobody shows up. The book's perfect for that. I get to read it and reflect on it and stuff. But when there's active dialogue, mostly non-Catholics, we talk about stuff. People ask me questions, and I do my best to be sensitive to the fact that there are different perspectives that people can have on things without compromising my own convictions and things that I'm convinced of. So I give my ideas. I'm not a jerk about it. We can't win. Yeah, so we didn't talk because we were listening. Yeah, I mean, I appreciate. These are things that I read anyways. So one of the reasons why I do these streams is that I recognize that sometimes if I'm going to be reading this anyways, somebody else might be able to benefit from it, or we could talk about it. I say something that Trent Horn says, and all of a sudden we have a really nice discussion going, and that's what it's all about. I like that. It doesn't make much sense to do anything live if we're not going to talk about it. I'm pretty interactive with chat. Chat takes the driving seat. Dragon says, I have read books on fasting, but I was just afraid for where we are going as the world has changed so much. Looks like something bigger is coming. I'm going to be honest. Now, while I don't go into date setting for Jesus' second coming and things like that, and I try to stay away from the doomsday preachers and those who, try to connect something in the book of Revelation to something in current events. There's no shortage of the creativity of the human mind expressed in, in such endeavors. But I have noticed, particularly with the Rainbow Coalition, a level of deception that I have never thought would even remotely be effective in encroaching into the mainstream. And so with the level of deception concerning sexual sin and the questioning of traditional morals and values to such a greater degree. Now, I suppose we could have anticipated greater deceptions as the culture continued to accommodate for definitions for traditional values or traditional things like marriage, right? So, like redefining marriage, redefining baby, redefining man and woman, redefining the sexual act. All of the redefining of the human being. I suppose we could have anticipated more and more of the ruthless criticism of all that exists. That kind of mentality would move on. It would continue to progress and march forward. And the ongoing revolution of just stripping everything down of its meaning and putting something else in its place. So in a sense, I think we could anticipate, given the kind of trends that have occurred over the last 100 years, that this would culminate in what Sartre referred to in his existential philosophy, that existence precedes essence. That we would really see that full-flowered idea that we can truly come to define the whatness of human nature through our experiences of reality and so on and so forth, to such an extent that it completely strips down everything, and that we're no longer formed by an objective reality outside of ourselves, but that we become fully defined by our own experiences and whatever thoughts we may ever have about that, and then projecting that upon reality. So, like when some people say that perception is reality, I'm like, no, it's not. Your perception can be wrong. What's wrong with you? There's objective proof to prove that. So it's kind of scary in my opinion. I know quite a few Orthodox people who would really like to discuss theological topics. Those kind of debates can get quite heated, if not for everyone. It's not for everyone. It is true, yeah. I've read some books written by some Orthodox, and there can be a lot of polemics involved when it comes to interpreting the early church fathers and things like that. And yeah, there are some in the Orthodox community that aren't very charitable in that regard, but there are people who are more traditionalist Catholics who are very unkind and very uncharitable in their approach to others and not pastoral at all. So it's more of an attitude of the human heart that can really infect ecumenical dialogue. Once again, the free exchange of ideas, the developing mutual understanding, and presenting one's case in a very calm, cold, reasoning kind of way, and allowing other people to do that as well. And I think a lot could be said for that. Present what one thinks is the best ideas, and hopefully the better ideas rise to the top. The subversion tactics are very insidious, that's true. Yeah. So do I think that there is something bigger coming? Like, is this that great deception that a lot of people will come to believe? Or we are going to be witnessing something even more deception, something even more insidious before the coming of Christ? Because I think Paul talks about in 1st or 2nd Thessalonians about a great deception. And we certainly have experienced all kinds of different types of deceptions, but man, I never thought I would see what we see today. Never thought that I would see any of that. So can it get worse? I hope not, but I think it will. I like to be an optimist, but at the same time, Christ is going to come back at some point. And going back to the title of our screen, I think there's going to get a point that God's not going to tolerate it anymore. He's just not going to tolerate it anymore. It's just done. Christ is going to come back. It's done. After reading the Bible, I've started to question the rapture. Well, I believe in this. The Catholics don't believe in the rapture. So any verses that you read that kind of sound like the rapture, they're just second coming verses. All of it is just second coming. I know that's a quick answer, but within the history of interpretation, so the very first time the idea of the rapture was a way in which one interpreted Paul in like 1st or 2nd Thessalonians, where it talks about we're going to be caught up in the air. The very first time that we ever see this in history, in the history of interpretation. So when we look at documentation in history, who was the first person to ever propose this idea? This was proposed first by John Darby, who lived in the 19th century. So we're looking at about 200, like within the last 200 years, this idea was being presented. It kind of piggybacks upon the idea of premillennialism. And so the framework goes, there's a pre-tribulation rapture, there's the tribulation, and then Christ comes, and then there's a 1,000-year reign, and so on and so forth. Now, we do see bits and pieces of premillennial ideas in the early church. in looking at the book of Revelation concerning the millennium in a strict literal way, which is really weird because the rest of the book of Revelation seems to not be so black and white and literal. It seems apocalyptic. So to take any of the numbers that are used in the book of Revelation seriously in a strict kind of way, I think kind of betrays the type of literature that it is. And so the church rejects premillennialism, but it is recognized in that some of the early church fathers does talk about it. It was rejected as heresy. It was referred to as a Chiliasm. And then within the last 200 years, John Darby had proposed his idea. He claims that it was the interpretation of Paul that he came to, but there's no evidence that anybody prior to him interpreted Scripture that way. That there may have been like a prophetess that may have proposed those ideas prior to him, but in terms of John Darby himself, he claims that he came to these interpretations of Scripture, and so I reject it as a novel interpretation. I think everybody should reject it. Nobody should take the idea of the pre-tribulation rapture seriously. It's very popular among Seventh-day Adventists and others. And so I think any verse that you're tempted to read within the light of that ideology, and if you're still having a hard time not recognizing that it's about the second coming, let me know. I can go over the verses with you. We can have a conversation about it. I'd be more than happy to, share more traditional ideas. Catholicism tends more towards preterism when it comes to the book of Revelation. That most of those things we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And also takes more of a amillennialist view that we are in the millennium, we're in the church age, and that's what that's talking about. Once again, a very apocalyptic kind of language, and so we shouldn't expect to find a direct word correlation to reality. It's more allegorical and things like that. You question this because the Bible is pretty straightforward and what will happen on some things. True. Luke 20:12. I can't remember what that is offhand. As a way to say this won't happen, we need to hold fast. If the rapture happens, then what Jesus says in 20:12 would not happen. Let me look at the passage really quick. And then we'll probably call it good after this. What's that, Luke? He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Okay, we're looking at, is this that vineyard parable of the tenants that Christ came? I think that Jesus is just talking about his first coming here. Yeah, the stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. That's talking about Jesus' first coming. This is used by, I think, both Paul and Peter. Peter has it in a sermon, and I think Paul elucidates on it. It's the idea that the Jews rejected Christ in his first coming. So let me see. You were talking about Luke 20:12. Yeah, this is just Jesus was giving a parable about that the Son was sent, and he's there now. So yeah, I don't think that has anything to do with a second coming or a rapture or anything. Parable of the tenants, I think, is about his first coming. For all this, they will lay their hands on you and persecute you. Oh, you wrote that wrong. Okay, just a second. Let me look at that because like that's different. Okay, so we're looking at Luke 21:12. So. Okay, so the destruction of the temple and the signs of the time. So listen to the disciples at the beginning of this. He says some of the disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned and whatnot. Jesus said, "One will not be left on another," and they say, "When will these things happen?" First question. And what will be the sign that they are about to take place? Now, this is in Luke, but in Matthew, there are two distinct questions that are made. So we kind of, at this point, we kind of have to look at Luke and Matthew together when it comes to this content. And that is, what are the signs that the destruction of the temple is going to happen in Jerusalem in 70 AD? All right. So a lot of what Jesus says in response actually fits quite well with the destruction, leading up to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem in 70 AD. Now, it's quite clear, at least in Matthew's gospel here, I think it's Matthew 25 here. Let me read Matthew 25. I think it's Matthew 25. It says, at that time, the kingdom of heaven, okay, not that one, was it 25? Bags, sheep, goats. Oh, I think it's 26. Sorry. No, that's not true either. 24. It must be 24. Yes, here it is. Okay, so Matthew 24, they ask, Jesus came up. It says, Jesus says that. Okay. Okay, so they say, tell us, when will this happen? That he's talking in reference to the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. When will this happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Okay, so it almost seems like there's two questions going on. So part of the trick in interpreting Matthew and Luke has to do with the fact that Jesus was asked multiple questions. And so it might not be quite clear, when does he stop talking about the destruction of the temple? And when does he start talking about, the end times? And is there some overlap? Like some think that the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem also prefigured the end times, for instance. So you were looking at, say, Luke 21:12. So I'm going off the cup here. But before all these, they shall lay their hands on you and persecute you, deliver you up to the synagogues and the prisons. Okay, all of this stuff happened in the 40-year period leading up to the destruction of the temple. All right, so one might be tempted to think that this is talking about the end times, and there most certainly might be some things that are going to happen in the end times that were prefigured in things that happened with the destruction of the temple. So when you're looking at they will seize you, they will persecute you, these are all the stuff we see in the book of Acts. We see all this stuff prior to 60 AD, let alone 70. So within the first generation, within I say generation because Jesus may have died around 33 AD, and then destruction of the temple in about 70 AD. So you have basically a 40-year or a generation period of time where Christians were highly persecuted. They were seized, persecuted. They were handed over to synagogues. They were put into prison. That happened to Peter, just in Acts alone. He would be brought before kings and governors. Paul had to deal with all of that, all on account of his name. So Yeah, this is just talking about the persecutions that are going to be happening after Jesus' ascension, after the Holy Spirit comes upon the church. We see this stuff already in the book of Acts, but a lot of persecutions from the Jews and from the Romans, because Christianity at first was kind of seen as a Jewish sect, but was later seen as a kind of like a new religion, and so that was illegal in the Roman Empire. So lots of persecutions came from both angles. And these sorts of things certainly did occur prior to the destruction of Jerusalem. So hopefully that helps, at least for now, as a good start. All right, folks, we've been live for almost 3 hours, so thank you so much for hanging out. I enjoy talking to all of you. If you got more questions, save them up for next time we get together, and I'd be more than happy to have a dialogue and do what I can to share my perspectives and hopefully put my education to use. I do stream regularly. I mostly do these kind of streams. Sometimes I'll read chapters and I'll talk to people several times a week. I do stream. Sometimes I do play video games online on stream, so I don't get into any dialogues at that point. But I've been really into Dead Cells lately. Kind of reminds me a lot of like a Castlevania game, but I do try to hang out and just talk about theology and life and culture and philosophy and theology and all the rest. So I will see everybody. Have a great night. God bless everybody.